Okay, it is 11 o'clock now. So I think we'll get started and we'll just have a couple more people join in as they reach their computer. My name is Olivia Foster. I'm the communications coordinator with the Ontario Woodlot Association, and I'm happy to welcome you today to our webinar about woodland art and inspiration. We've got four great speakers today. Before we get started, I have a land acknowledgement to read that what we share before OWA meetings and webinars now as well. So the OWA acknowledges that we are gathered on the shared traditional lands of the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. Long before today, there has always been Indigenous peoples, and they are the original stewards of this land. We are grateful for the opportunity to live, work, and play here. We offer our thanks and honor all the generations of peoples before us who have survived and thrived here since time long past. This land continues to serve as a meeting place and crossroads for peoples of many nations. Our recognition of the contributions and importance of Indigenous peoples is part of our collective commitment to make truth and reconciliation real in our community as we strive for a harmonious shared future. Now, before we dive into the presentations today, I just have a couple housekeeping items, fairly standard for these meetings. So today, this webinar is meeting style. So you are able to unmute yourself to ask questions, but during the presentation, we just ask that your mic remains muted, just so we don't get any background noise. You are invited to turn your camera on if you would like. It's especially nice during the Q&A session to be able to see people's faces and interact a little bit. So we invite you to do that. And there is going to be a Q&A session. There is a chat box, which is enabled. So you're welcome to put your questions in the chat throughout. I will be moderating it, and we will have some time for questions at the end with all of our great speakers. And lastly, this webinar is being recorded, so just be mindful of that, and we'll be able to share it after the session today. So now with all of our introductory stuff set aside, I'll introduce our first speaker today, which is Kate Hayday. Kate is the co-founder of Maker's Dozen, and her studio is tucked away in a log cabin in her 25-acre forest in Quinte West. Her work specializes in the places where art, tech, and nature intersect. Over her career, Kate has assessed AI and robotics technologies, working as a freelance journalist in Toronto, helped run international hackathons, learned needle felting, built an Arduino games controller out of a 2x4, it's quite impressive, made tons of print and digital content look pretty and work well, and continues to do a mashup of other activities that don't often appear in the same run-on sentence. She most recently designed and built That Flipping Game, a free memory game card game for Androids. I'll just ask that everybody mute themselves. Thanks. Balancing off her time spent staring at screens, she loves to wander the woods and make things with her hands. The moment she learned that she could paint with plants, she was hooked and is delighted to be sharing that with us today. So thank you so much, Kate. Wonderful introduction, and we're excited to hear from you today.
Thank you, Olivia. That is a lovely introduction, which I now have to follow. I appreciate that. I am thrilled to be here today. There's so much that I want to share with you about wild inks, how I use them, how you can use them. And I've worked out I can stick to time if I just talk really fast. So I'm just going to dive right into it. I'm going to share my screen with you. And just a quick housekeeping note that if you hear kind of like chatting, not a microphone thing, it is that I'm sitting right beside a brooder full of baby chickens. So hopefully they will choose to take a nap soon. And let's see, you see my screen okay?
Yeah, we can see your screen.
You're muted. I'll take that as a yes. Okay, great. So you've already covered who I am, who Maker's Dozen is. So let's just go right into what are wild inks. So I'm not going to try and define ink. That is a whole art theory thing that I'm not going to get into the weeds on. The only way I'm getting into the weeds is to forage them to make ink. So for our purposes today, wild or any pigmented liquid that leaves a lasting, if changing, that part's important, mark on paper, preferably homemade, from a natural and, even more important, abundant source. So something like berries and bark. They also tend to be a bit more feisty and alive than what you might buy in the store, but we're going to get into that in a bit. So what can you make into ink? Everything. There's color everywhere, especially if you're fond of the color brown. There is also yellow abundantly everywhere, but as we're going to get into, there's lots of other hues that are readily available as well, some from very surprising places. So a few good plants that you might have in your woodlot that you could turn into inks to make art with. I ate caps. I like to leave nut meat for critters. That's why I have the mass trees, and they do the hard work of separating it. So win-win. Wild grape is a wonderful ink plant, both the berries and the vine. The vine can be turned into a charcoal, which we could talk about if you like. Staghorn sumac makes a lovely pink color. Goldenrod, which you may have growing at the edge of your forest, makes a lovely yellow. If you are a woodlot owner who happens to also heat their house in part with wood, you have access to soot, which makes a wonderful ink as well. And now the twist, the most fantastic ink plant, in my opinion, and it's a plant that doesn't often get fantastic joined to it, is something that you might be familiar with in your woodlot, which is common buckthorn. Both its berries and its bark. So buckthorn yields 5 colors, 2 for dyeing, 3 for inks. It makes a ruddy pink color, a mustard yellow color, and for dyeing fabric. And then for inks, you can get it to produce a brown color, and both a purple and a green. And that is the fun twist that we'll get into. They're both coming from the berries. So how can you make ink from plants that you find in your forest? So first, quick note on foraging, kind of mandatory. Take from abundance and leave abundance. If you're not going to be able to leave abundance, walk away and take from something else. And if you don't have access to a forest, and if you aren't able to find the plants that I've mentioned here, you can also upcycle kitchen scraps. There are lots of foods that you might be cooking with already that can also be used for the same process. I would start with something like red cabbages and onion skins. They're fabulous. Choose invasives, be risk smart, know where and how you're foraging. Lots of things, roadsides are sprayed with pesticides, and don't get caught ankle deep in poison ivy because you're after a cool plant, she said from experience. I'll finally ask for permission, not forgiveness. It's always better to make a new friend than a new enemy. So the basic process, I like to say that if you can make tea, you can make wild ink. I put absolutely no thought into making this into a nice acronym, so it's GADS. So step 1 is gather your materials. So if it's a wet material like berries, or a dry material like bark. If you're working with a wet material, it might be as simple as pick, smush, and start using. But you can also dilute it with water to stretch your supply, or maybe dilute the color a bit. With bark, the sort of basic rule, or any dry material, the basic rule is basically a 2-to-1 ratio. But this is, depending on your perspective, either a scientific investigation or an art form. So add as much water as seems appropriate to you. If you add too much, you can always boil it off. But you're basically making it into a brew. And so the boiling it off gets to the third point, which is to add warmth. Warmth, not heat. You don't want to be boiling, you want to steep it. Think of it like a slow burn-in tea. And you'll know that it's done because you are happy with it. So you can test for doneness by taking strips of, say, watercolor paper, and as you steep, you dip them in periodically. If you're happy with the color that you're getting, you're finished. If you're not happy, you can either add more material or add more water, add more time. And finally, you will filter plant material out of what you're using if you prefer to. Some people like the gritty texture and work that into their art. That's your call. And you can, at that point, add something called a binder. Personally, I almost never do. We can get into what binders are and how they work if you like a little bit. I'm no expert in that, but primarily the plants that I'm talking about work just as are, just the plant material plus water plus time equals ink. And then store it. This is the plant material. It will go funky on you. Adding a clove and keeping it in the fridge goes a long way. I have a little section in my fridge dedicated to inks because my husband is very supportive. The whole top left corner of our fridge is just a dead zone now to us for anything else. So finally, most importantly, is enjoy the magic. They are a very a live and dynamic way of creating art. So what I have here is maybe my favorite example of that. And this gets back to the buckthorn berries we were talking about, which is buckthorn berries are very sensitive to having their pH changed. So what we have on the left is just crushed buckthorn berries. They make as is a beautiful purple ink that is very color fast and looks lovely on the page. However, if you want to turn it into green, you can add a few drops of lye, like a soap maker would use, and it almost instantly, as the lye hits the buckthorn berry solution, it shifts from a color to vibrant green. So what you see happening there in the top right of the image. And so that's the very quick version of how to make the inks. Here's some of the ways that I make them. I refer to the pieces that I make as wild inklings because I basically sit down and do quick sketches with them. So I'm going to run through these very quickly just to give you some examples of the kinds of things you can make. You'll notice a theme. I tend to paint nature because I find it immensely satisfying to paint nature from nature. When the first time you paint an acorn with an acorn or paint wild grape with wild grapes, it's just, it's delicious. So that said, no beavers were harmed in the making of this first image. This was painted with acorns. So this is a beaver painted with acorns, wild grape, use some acorn avocado pits to shift the pH a little bit. We could talk about that if you like, and oak galls. This is an acorn painted with acorns. And what you see there on the tip, that little pink nibbin at the top of the growth head is painted with sumac. So that's the lovely color that you can get from the sumac panicles. We've got a little owl. We've got a dandelion, which ironically was no dandelions were used in this at all. I actually used horsetail for a lot of this, which is a very fun ink, but also very fugitive and shifty. And then we have a raven painted with wild grapes. We've got an American toad that a friend requested. We've got slugs, we've got spiders, ruby-throated hummingbird. And this is to show that you can also use it to paint sort of figurative things. A friend of mine asked me to paint her hands holding dirt. So here's hands holding dirt. This is mostly painted with wild violets. And back to bunnies and robins. So those are some examples. So every color that you saw there was a color that I made mostly from our forest. So my process for doing that, I get my little palette of inks out. I store mine in these little dropper containers, both because they're a wonderful vessel for it. They work very well for dispensing and storing it. And also they're fun and tactile and bring me joy. And so the other important piece of this image on the left here is the paper. So these inks make watercolors look dry. These are very wet materials. That's possibly just how I make them, but you basically want a nice sturdy paper that is very absorptive. So think of it like something that would absorb a coffee stain very well. So you want a nice, not specialty watercolor paper, but watercolor paper. And on the right is the other way of using them as inks, which is maybe more traditionally what people think of when they think of ink, which is for penmanship. So what I'm doing here on the right is using a quill pen that I made from a turkey feather, and that ink is made from oak galls. And that gets us to our nearly final point, which is that you can paint with plants and you can also paint with plants. So there is using the plants to create the pigment, and there's using the plants to create the tools. So what we have on the screen now is a pen made from invasive honeysuckle. I've also made these with sumac, basically any branch that has a very soft pith that can be removed, and then you can whittle the end to make a nib. And I like to mention the ugly duckling phase. I don't know if this is just a component of how I make art, but it does often go through a moment where it's like, oh, that's hot garbage. And I would encourage you to keep painting. These inks are very forgiving of that phase. Like I have here the squirrel that took a hard left turn into looking like a demon, but we managed to get back to something squirrelish. And that's that you can keep layering, keep working. And the ink sometimes also will reveal, this is a unique factor, I think, to wild inks, that they will interact with each other in an unexpected way. So just because it's on the page doesn't mean it's completely settled. And this was just a quick note about that when I paint, I tend to do the eyes first, because I feel like if you get the eye, people, they believe it's a critter. And finally, a note on the master point that we talked about right at the beginning, which is that these are dynamic colors. And so some of them are very color fast, some of them are very fugitive. So when I paint, I like to use a combination of ones that I know that are very interesting that might not hold their colors well with ones that are reliable, like say wild grape and acorn, so that in the end, even though it will change over time, you will still have a pleasing image. So on the left here, we have the original, and then the same image several years later. I believe it has aged gracefully, but it has certainly aged and changed. And so it's something to keep in mind when you're composing your own pieces. And that's it from me. I wanted to mention a couple of books that I find wonderful resources if you are interested in this hobby. One is The Organic Artist by Nick Nato. He's fabulous, start to finish organic art making, and Make Ink, which is the book that got me into this in the first place. I saw it on a friend's coffee table and I was like, I must learn what this is. So that's everything for me. If you have any questions at the end when we get to that, I'll be happy to answer them. And thank you so much. I hope you give this a try.
Thank you so much, Kate. That was wonderful. And I was just thinking as you were going through your ugly duckling phase, your ugly duckling, I think, would be my masterpiece. It's beautiful. Thank you so much for going through all of those images with us and sharing some tips and tricks along the way. So our next speaker
My
today
pleasure.
is Kyla Vitek. Guided by the perfection of nature, Kyla uses natural elements with ethically sourced precious metals and gemstones to create handmade silver and gold jewelry. Often examining the odd or mundane aspects of plant life, Kyla utilizes the techniques of organic casting to immortalize cedar sprigs, maple keys, twigs, and seed pods to create pieces of wearable art. Kyla graduated from the Material Art and Design program, majoring in jewelry and metalsmithing at OCAD University in 2005. Since then, she has taught jewelry making classes at OCAD-U, George Brown College, and private studios, participated in jewelry shows, and has worked as a designer and goldsmith for other businesses, as well as her own. These days, she's focused on designing and creating her own jewelry lines and custom orders for clients from her home studio in Pontypool, Ontario. Thank you so much for joining us, Kyla. Just see if I can make sure that, oh yes, you're
Am
unmuted
I
and you're
muted?
ready to go. Yeah, we can hear you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for that lovely introduction. And welcome to my home studio. I decided to set up my computer not in my usual computer spot because I wanted to show you my bench because, whoops, I'll move it out of the way. So this is a pretty typical jewelry bench. It's just, it's a nice one my brother built for me. And I have a little like presentation prepared with some images of work, just because what I work in is really small. So I thought it might be easier for you to see that way. And then I can show you things on the bench later if you want. I put aside a couple things that show like a progression of steps. So hopefully what I'm talking about maybe makes some sense. I will say when I have the screen share up, I can't see anything else. So if I don't know if anyone tries to get my attention, you'll have to do it out loud. All right, so I'm going to share my screen and hopefully you can see it.
Yeah, we can see it.
Awesome.
Don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you're in full screen mode there now. Yeah, you're good to go.
All right. Okay, excellent. So this first title screen, I just put one of my maple key pieces, and that I actually ended up using for my logo, as you can see. It was one of the very first things that I ever made out of like a nature piece. So I kind of will get into how that started, but I just thought I'd showcase that one because I have a real connection to them. I think there's a real like nostalgia factor for them because a lot of people played with them as kids, but also they're a symbol of Canada, and I just think they're really beautiful. So I make a lot of those. Let's see, there we go. So I put some pictures of baby Kyla in here for you to see. These are like 20 years ago, I think. This is a picture of me in the jewelry studio where I went to school at OCAD University. This is the silversmithing room. When I was in school, the program was called Material Art and Design, and you could do ceramics, fiber, or jewelry and metalsmithing. So that's where I went. And I was really, even though it was more of a jewelry program, I was quite into the metalsmithing part. So in this picture, you can see that I'm using a Delrin hammer, which is just like a plastic hammer to protect the metal from getting dinged. And I'm forming it over the stake that's just in a vise on a stump. So you can actually do some really complicated shapes with sheets of metal just by hammering and annealing. And annealing just means you are warming the metal back up when it becomes work hardened, and it realigns the molecules so it's soft and workable again. So the pieces at the bottom of this image are pieces from my thesis project that really focused on carnivorous plants specifically. This is another one of the pieces that I made for that project. So this is Drosera, which is like a sundew carnivorous plant. And in school, that was sort of the first time I'd really looked at plants in a different way in terms of like actually researching them. So I did a lot of research about these during the process of school, and I just became like really fascinated that beyond the beauty that I was just sort of used to looking at, like just looking at things just for the aesthetic appeal, I started kind of learning more background information about things and just the fascinating way of how the ecosystem all interacts. And I really got into it in school. Oh, this is the same one in my studio. So I pulled it out the other day because I was like, I should probably put this thing on display instead of having it in a box. But yeah, so that's sort of that stuff. So one of the things because you guys want to talk about like inspiration, and I thought about it because I thought like, well, what is inspiring? And I don't know how to become inspired. I just sort of am really inspired by nature. I've always been very interested in animals and nature as a kid. I always brought like little weird things home that I'd found, like snakes and things that I'd find, and my mom loved that. But I also really would sometimes look at the things that other people didn't really notice, or the things that people thought were weeds, or the things that people overlooked, and I would really like examine them quite closely. So this particular piece was a project in school that was supposed to be a bud vase, and I thought, well, everyone knows flowers are beautiful, but what about the leaf? The leaf is beautiful too. So I made this to reflect the underside of the leaf so that you could appreciate it from all angles. So that was sort of the thought behind that one. This is actually a piece that I did outside of school, but very shortly after graduating. And so I'm still doing some sculptural type of pieces, but moving more into like the jewelry pieces as well. I'd love to do more metalsmithing again. It's not a super practical career. So I'm sort of sticking to jewelry for now, and hopefully I can do some metalsmithing for fun times. But this piece was a piece I made for a big charity event. And so the flowers are cherry blossoms, and I have like a million photos of cherry blossoms on my phone. The branches here are cast from real cherry branches. So that's a lot of what I do now is called organic casting. So I collected these just from the ground around cherry trees. I believe it was in High Park where I used to live in Toronto, and they're cast in bronze. And then these are all hand fabricated out of sterling silver and gold wires in the center. And this is just another inspirational photo. I'm sure a lot of you have a whole camera roll full of photos like this. Here's another piece. This is a fairly early piece, and I used to do a lot of piercing work. I still do it sometimes, but this is all hand pierced out of sheet, and it's modeled after this Canada Columbine pendant. So fairly recently kind of started learning more about native plants. So I'm trying with my work to kind of transition to really like giving them a big focus. This one I actually made before I had even really thought about it. And I just saw one and I didn't know what it was. And I made, because I'd only ever seen the purple one. So I made this pendant, and then I kind of started learning more about native plants and the benefits that they have, and I'm in the process of changing all my gardens over to native plants. So you'll see the jewelry will become like more and more geared towards that. These are just kind of a typical photo shoot image that I do in the summer. I do go out in the winter too, but they're not as it's not as fun to do the photo shoot in the winter. So these are more the cedar pieces. This ring is cast from a cedar sprig, and then this narrow one is just the center stem from a piece of cedar. This bigger ring with rails is the center stem with rails added. And I have a piece that I will show you guys later after I go through this. There it is again, just more photo shoot pictures. This is a typical look at my bench, which is usually a big disaster zone of a variety of jewelry stuff and dried nature things to cast. There's another bunch of pieces of cedar pieces, and this is me setting the stone. So the piece is in a thermal plastic to hold it, and I can set the stone and then remove it from that with warm water after I'm done. It doesn't damage the stone. I did a photo shoot last year, so that was kind of fun. So I just wanted to put some photos of that because this is all at my parents' property, which is just down the street from me here in Kawartha Lakes. Just seemed fitting. These are this is kind of a good example of some of the more strange and strange jewelry that people might not think is beautiful, but I think is beautiful. These are all made from fungus. So these earrings stick out from your ears as if they're growing out of your ears. And I just think that's so beautiful. Like, who couldn't look at that and think that's beautiful? Here's these earrings are, these are actually like a seed pod that's from a trumpet vine plant, or maybe not a seed pod, where the flowers come out of. I think it developed seeds later than when I picked it. And then here's some processed pictures of the fungus. So these pieces here are the real fungus pieces that I picked. I dried them and then they had to be sealed. So I used nail polish in this case. I have experimented with a lot of different things to seal nature items because during the casting process, if they're not sealed, then they don't turn out. So that happens a lot with organic casting. You can't get too attached to your models. Oh, this is just some studio shots of me in the studio at my home studio and at various jobs I've had. So I wish I had a laser welder. That's what this is in the top picture here. I don't have one of those anymore, but I have some other tools that are still great. And again, in my studio and at a market, which I do a lot of summer markets. And this is bittersweet. I have some pieces that I cast from the shells of these. So I've collected the shells and cast them and added gemstones and pearls where the berries would be. So they're cast directly. With these ones, they're too thin to cast. So I put wax on the inside first. And then maple keys. And just some interesting textures. I have a lot of photos of just like inspirational, interesting textures and things that I see. Some wood castings. And oh yes, and I also work in gold. So I had to put this picture because it was just fun. And this is an engagement ring that I'll show you a silver version of in a moment. This is one of the first gold custom jobs I did. It was the orchid. And then this engagement ring was for a client who loves lavender. So she wanted lavender flowers. And this is the same ring made in silver, but with a pearl. So you can really change the design even based on the same thing. It looks a lot different depending on how you do it. And this is my garden. And that's my thanks for watching. Let's see if I can get out of here.
Thanks so much, Kyla. Yeah. I forgot to mention at the beginning as well that you are one of our featured artisans in the Woodlander, and Kyla also came out to our it's now the Kawartha Woodland Expo. She came out
thank you.
Exhibitor to one of those. Yeah, and thank you for.
And I think I have stuff to show you, but I think I talked too long, so I can show you at the Q&A.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Yeah. Thanks, Kyla.
Yeah.
So next up, I'd like to introduce Erin Alladin. Erin grew up surrounded by forests, forestry, gardens, and crafts, and has combined all four as a writer, editor, and content creator about the natural sciences, outdoor education, and ecologically mindful gardening. In the last couple of years, her outdoor experiments have included making baskets from all sorts of local materials, resulting in a fair bit of failure and some very satisfying success. Thank you for joining us, Erin. We are looking forward to seeing your baskets. And Kyla, I might just ask you to stop sharing your screen there. We've still got it up on our end here. Oh, no problem. We're all set. Thanks, Kyla, and take it away, Erin.
Thank you, Olivia. I'm not doing a presentation. I'm going to be holding things up. So if anybody wants to see my face and my props bigger, you can change your view. It's probably up in the top right corner. And I'm going to do that myself so I can see what you're seeing. All right. Oh, I'm just seeing Olivia. Interesting. Didn't occur to me to check on this beforehand.
I can see you big on my screen, Erin.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Then I won't worry about it. So I, as my intro said, grew up with a lot of nature in my life and also a lot of handcraftedness. I sewed, I messed around with tools. My parents were always making stuff and growing things. But something that none of us knew how to do, and I always wanted to, was to make baskets out of local materials. And I knew that I could, order things from far away that were really easy to work with, but that's not what I wanted. I wanted to go outside my door and make baskets out of what I found there. And a couple of years ago, I started experimenting. I saw somebody online making baskets out of Himalayan blackberries. And I don't have blackberries as long as those ones, but I have blackberries. So I went out and I made this little mess of a nest, but it's got the technique there in theory. You've got your cross pieces and you've got your wrapping around. It is technically the right way to make a basket, just not very well yet. And after that, I started messing around with other things. This one uses the interior of burdocks. And this is daylily leaves wrapped around it. So you can see I'm getting a little tighter, but I don't really know how to finish it off yet. Some other woven experiments I did were with corn husk, which worked pretty well to make a nice grid, but I didn't know at the time that it would all curl up into a modern art sculpture if I let it dry while I was working on it. So someday I might do something fun with that on purpose because these are kind of delightful, but not practical for baskets. One thing that I learned to do as a teenager when I taught outdoor education skills at a summer camp was to make cordage. So this is daylily cordage, just made of a couple of daylily leaves twisted together. And I thought maybe I can do something with that and my crochet skills. And so I tried crocheting a basket out of that. You could maybe make a purse. It's very floppy. So, you can make a thing, but not what I wanted. And I tried wrapping, like stitching the cordage around itself, which is a little more rigid, but not quite there. This stuff that I was working on, I took to a local craft group where a bunch of us women from the village just come out on a Tuesday with whatever we're working on and we chat while we do it. Very informal, very nice. And a lady who's in her 80s saw me working on these, and the next time she showed up with this basket and she said, I can't do this craft anymore. I want you to take this. And inside were all these longleaf pine needles from Florida and some beeswax, a very nice strong needle, and some raffia. And with those, I learned to make from her examples this kind of basket. This is not weaving, this is coiling. And I actually have an article coming out in the Summer Woodlander about coiled baskets because this is a lot more accessible if you don't have materials that are suitable for weaving baskets. With coiled baskets, you just make a bundle of an inner material. So I would soak these in hot water for a while and make a bundle. I would put them inside a gauge. This is a paper drinking straw. If I wanted it smaller, I've got this bit of shrink plastic for around wires, anything tube shaped. and then wrap around it with a very flexible outer material and end up making a coiled basket like this. And you can get good at really cool patterns for the stitches too. And so that was my entry into a technique that I could make so many different things out of things I had around my place. So I'll show you different materials that I've used. This is my favorite. This is daylily over corn husk. The corn husk is really light and strong, and it gives it so much more rigidity than the daylily has on its own. So that's something that I'm working on to harvest herbs in. And these ones are more of the same, just in different shapes. I also tried using white pine needles, which work just as well as the longleaf pine needles. It just takes a lot more time because they're so much smaller. But they do have the advantage of being really flexible even as they dry. And I used waxed cotton string on that. And then this one I think is my favorite. These are wild strawberry runners used in place of the string. And so there's my bundle of runners. It smells incredible. And I just harvested these at the end of the season when they had already, rooted all of their babies and they didn't need the runners anymore. I've also harvested them from my own garden, which are a lot bigger, and I haven't worked with them yet, but I can tell that they're going to be a great material. And here's how I keep my corn husks. If you ever try this and you find the corn husks are just spilling everywhere, stick them in a jar. Very handy. What else have I got? This is one where I wove daylily over some inner staves, which you can't see because I actually figured out how to weave them back in finally. And here are my first actual successful weaving projects. I went and my landlords have a couple of weeping willows right on the road, and some of their branches were just, flopping on the ground and getting run over. So I thought, I'm doing them a favor, and I clipped them off and I hung them in my basement to dry for several months. And eventually I was able to actually follow the instructions to make a proper woven basket. So having the right materials makes a really big difference with weaving. I also went out this spring, and there are a lot of young willows that grow in the ditches along my road, and they're right under the hydro wires. So the township comes around and cuts them down midsummer. So I cut them down early, and this is going to shrink as it dries, but these are just the bits that I cut off. I've got a whole bunch of others that are drying properly that I can weave with next winter. And I also finally found a way to use my cordage. These are twigs off of a big white pine branch that came down, and I wrapped the cordage around it. So it's never going to be as tidy as something where I can weave in the ends, but you've got it kind of an interesting rustic art piece. A couple other materials that I've collected from around my woodland / field land, where I've got some meadow and I've got an old garden from a previous owner of this land, is bindweed, which I think is going to work really well for weaving onto something stronger in terms of staves. Dandelion, which I've seen some really beautiful baskets made out of online. It's nice and shiny. Here's my daylily, which I just cut down at the end of the season and hang as green leaves, and then eventually they dry into this yellow color. And these are what the burdock pith look like after that's processed. Finally, I haven't used these yet, but I've seen a lot of people work with iris leaves and make really beautiful baskets out of them. So this isn't something that I do professionally. I have sold all of one basket on request, but it's been a really exciting process to get to know what I can work with around me, and knowing these techniques and what materials work for them, I know that I can continue to go out and find things that are going to be effective basket materials, or even not super effective, but really fun. basket materials. And you can see more about that in the upcoming Woodlander. And I might come back another time and write one about weaving, because this one's about how to do the coiled basket. And that's 10 minutes exactly. Look at that.
That would be fantastic, Erin. We always appreciate everybody contributing articles to the Woodlander. And I should mention as well that I believe Kate has one as well coming out soon. So thank you both. And with that, I will introduce our next speaker. Now, Josie Dinsmore is a photographer, freelance writer, blogger, creator, and adventurer currently living in Northern Ontario. She loves to go out on adventures and explore the beautiful, rugged landscapes of Ontario. Her favorite tree species is eastern white pine, which also inspires many of her photos. Josie kindly donated some of her calendars as well to the OWA to sell at our conference this past April. So thank you very much again for that, Josie. And I'm looking forward to your talk, which I'll actually start sharing my screen here for this as well. And we can get going. Current slide.
Okay, well, hello everyone. I've been doing like photography since I was quite young, and I've always enjoyed nature, landscape type of photography the most. I spent a lot of time when I was a kid in the outdoors with my family. We do a lot of camping, hiking, traveling to Ontario parks, and so of course the camera would come along with me, and I would take photos of what I saw. And I think that's where the outdoor photography interest kind of started. So over the years, that's just continued. I will, head out on an adventure, and the camera will come with me. And I never really have a plan. The photography I generally do, I don't say, oh, I want to go out and take a picture of this and this and this. I kind of just let it happen, just, wander around and let, the natural beauty inspire me. It's so amazing the things that you can see in the outdoors, in nature, out in the real world. The beautiful, spectacular landscapes that are just out there. And then the feeling that you get when you see these landscapes. And so when you're able to capture that same feeling and beauty in a photo, and then share it to the world, it's just so great. I always pay a lot of attention to the little details when I'm out and about. I'm not just kind of looking around. I'm looking at everything down in the ground, the little flowers, up to the tops of the trees. Just really trying to absorb it all. And it's always great, when you'll be out, say on a hike down a trail, and a certain scene will kind of just hit you, and you're like, oh, that's so nice, I want to get a photo of that, and you just try and capture it, the best that you can. Doing a lot of nature landscape type photography, of course, there are a lot of trees and forests in my photos. And often trees will become the focal point of a photo, or I might try to include them in a landscape scene to make it more interesting. I find that trying to add a tree into a scene, it kind of just makes the photo feel more complete, kind of fills the space, but adds an interesting point of interest. So if I'm taking a photo of a sunset, and I can somehow get a tree in between me and the sunset, you get this beautiful silhouette. That's something that I really love to get. Reflection photos are something that I really love. So, trees or forest along the edge of a lake, and then you get those mirror-like reflections. That's always great to capture. Another favorite of mine would be rocks and trees. The rocky shorelines, windswept pines, kind of the Georgian Bayish type landscapes. And, you have these rugged rocks, and then these kind of bent over sometimes mangled looking trees, and those scenes are just perfect to me. I actually prefer to take photos of trees that are maybe missing half their branches or leaned over. You know, I find they're more interesting, maybe you know, a bit more character to them. You know, kind of like those scenes, group of seven type trees that you would see in their paintings. And then, of course, in the fall, the deciduous trees, you know, you have the beautiful colors, and you can capture some really amazing shots that time of year. You know, it's really nice when you can get a great mix of colors in a photo, you know, different colors of leaves, maybe some, you know, dark pine trees mixed in, white birch always looks great with the colors, and sometimes you get almost like a bit of an abstract type photo with when all the colors are mixed together. So for the past several years, I've created and sold calendars featuring my photography. These are mostly, you know, landscape and nature type photos. And then I've also sold some prints, some cards, stickers, postcards, that kind of thing. I've also done work for Ontario Parks. I've done a few photo shoots for them. I've done some work for some different tourism agencies, both photography and writing as well. So the writing and photography kind of go together sometimes pretty nicely. I'm on social media with Josie Dinsmore Photography, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and I post a lot of photos on those accounts. And I get quite a few, just lots of lovely comments from people. And some of the best ones are when, like a scene you were inspired to take a photo of, and then you post online, inspires someone else to want to go out and visit the location. So that's always really neat to hear that people have made a point to visit someplace because they saw your photos. I also have a second set of social media accounts and a website called Adventures with Josie. And that's kind of where I post a lot of fun little adventures that I go on. So you'll kind of see some of the behind the scenes of the photography stuff. Maybe I've posted some photos at a location, and then over at Adventures with Josie, I've shared more of where I was when I took those photos and a bit more of the story. But I have a few tree forest related photos that I thought I would share today with you guys. So if you want to, yeah, great. So the first one here, this is a good example of a photo where I've deliberately tried to include a tree in it to just add to the photo. You know, here you have a beautiful northern lights across the sky, and it would have been a great photo with or without the tree. But to me, adding the tree just kind of, it completes it. It adds, you know, an interesting detail to it. It adds some perspective as well. So the second photo is obviously a reflection photo. And I really love getting these ones. I mean, you have all the different shapes of the trees, different you know, colors of green, and then just perfectly reflected in the water. And at this point, basically the entire photo is basically tree once it's reflected down into the lake. And for me, with this photo in particular, what really does it is the bright yellow tamarack that's kind of just off center. And it really just, it makes an already nice scene just, you know, really pop. So those photos are great to get. And the third photo, I took this one along a trail at Saint-Maël-du-Champlain Provincial Park. And this particular trail, there's these beautiful tall red pines along the first section, and the trail kind of just winds its way through them for a while. And you know, if you're standing in the right spot, like I was when I took this photo, it kind of you can see down the trail a bit of a distance. So in this particular scene, it kind of draws your eyes right in, the way that you can see the trees off into the distance down the trail. And even it draws your eyes up as well, the trees going right up and off of the top of the photo. And then you have the bright light coming in and the shadows. And I just really liked this scene when I saw it in real life, and I was able to capture it quite nicely in a photo. And the fourth photo, this you've probably already seen this one. So this is kind of a good example of trying to get a different perspective on you know, something you typically take a photo of a tree, but a different angle. I was taking photos at a provincial park one fall, and you know, trying to get different shots of the leaves, and I was looking for something different, something interesting. So I started trying different angles. For this one, I leaned right up against the trunk, and I held the camera, you know, straight up the tree, and it kind of gave this interesting, kind of unique view that you don't always see in photos. And so yeah, it's one thing, like a little bit of advice, you know, if you're out you know, trying to get different photos of trees or forests, is really just look around and try different angles. Like, you know, take 20 photos of one tree, but you know, maybe get down on the ground and look up, maybe walk farther away and turn your camera on an angle. And because sometimes, you know, you might get a nice shot of something and it's nice, but if you just, you know, adjust your angle a little bit, or maybe try and include a bit of maybe a fern that's growing off to the side of it, kind of in front, you know, you might get something really special. So the equipment I use is quite basic. I don't have a huge amount of photography equipment. I kind of just use a DSLR. I mostly just use one lens because I find I like when it's easier, I find, you know, you want to do it more. So I try to keep my, you know, my equipment very basic. So I'm not switching out lenses. Some people, of course, will have multiple lenses that they will switch out while they're out on one hike. I sometimes use a tripod if there's, say, moving water or night sky, but generally I just hand hold the camera. And yeah, and then I do very little editing on my photos, because I really like them to look as natural and real as they did in real life. And basically the extent of the editing is just if the photo has turned out a little darker, you know, maybe the settings were a touch off, just putting that brightness back into it. But I really like not only capturing natural scenes, but keeping the photos natural and real as well. But yeah, so that is a little of what I do with my photography.
Thanks so much, Josie. Those are beautiful photos, especially that one in the trail scene where you're getting that dappled light coming through. That can be challenging to do. You've captured it so beautifully.
Thank you.
So we're just waiting for a couple more questions in the Q&A, but I do have one to get us started. I might start with you, Erin. So if someone wanted to start dabbling in basket making, basket weaving, how could they start? How would you suggest that they get going at first?
I think the coiled baskets are definitely the most accessible, and making them out of pine needles especially is very common. There's a lot of resources out there. There are Facebook groups dedicated to it that have a ton of resources, a ton of examples, and lots of people who will answer questions. So I think that's a really good beginning point.
Excellent. Okay, good to know. There's so many resources out there these days as well, not just books, but videos and channels like yours as well. A question for Kate from the chat. What is the shelf life of these pigments, or is it all different? Does it depend on the species?
If it doesn't have a good shelf life, it doesn't end up in my rotation. So they're sort of pre-filtered for longevity, but very long shelf lives. As I said, I do keep mine in the fridge, which does help, but mostly that just helps with it going off. You're not going to be eating them. So even if it goes off, if it gets a little bit of mold skin, you can just skim that off and keep using the ink. But I have inks that are, I'm still using batches that I made 6 years ago, and the colors are as vibrant and true as they were the first day that I used them. I'd say the ones that change are ones where you have messed with the pH a bit. So ones like, I find the green buck. I just realized I had that up there. The green buckthorn I find is beautiful and vibrant initially and does not last very long. Now that's on the order of like a couple of years. But yeah, so ones where you've added it, modified the pH, I find the color is not as true, but ones like wild grape, acorn, they're still purple, they're still brown years later.
Amazing. So we're looking at years, not a matter of days or weeks or even months.
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay. So I'll just invite everybody to put any more questions that they have in the chat, but I do have one each for Kyla and Josie. So Josie, I'll start with you. As far as photography goes, what would you say inspired you to first get into it? Is it just something that you found that you enjoyed, or did you have ambition to become a photographer?
I think for me it was just like, you know, my family, my mom would take a lot of photos of us and when we did things, and then eventually my parents bought me and my brother little cameras to play around with, and I kind of just really liked it, and I kept taking pictures, and I'd get a new camera and taking more pictures, and it kind of just kept, you know, developing. There's a photography pun from there. And one of the big things for me was actually going on Facebook. A little bit after Facebook started, I got on there and I started posting some of the just random pictures I was taking. And then I started to get comments from family and friends. They're like, oh, you know, this was the first time a lot of them had seen some of my photos, and they, you know, they had all these great comments. And then eventually I started a public, you know, kind of Facebook page and got more comments. And so it was kind of things like that. It was something I liked doing. And then hearing people say that they actually like what you're doing kind of encouraged me to continue and just, you know, develop the skills over the years. I never went to school for it, just self-taught. So yeah, just kind of, it was something I liked, and it grew into this.
That's wonderful. It sounds like it's developed very organically from a young age and blossomed from there. So my last question is for you, Kyla. I know that from all your photos and all that you talk about, it sounds like you get a lot of your inspiration for your jewelry making from nature. Is it through walks, or where do you find that inspiration for new pieces?
I would say it's kind of partly half and half. Like a lot of the stuff I collected was from walks with my dog. We don't go on walks as much anymore because she's 13 and she can't really. So I'm kind of more like sticking closer around these days, but I get a lot of things out of my garden. My parents have a big property that's like 98 acres or something. So I go on walks there, and I sit on the ground a lot and like inspect things. Like I kind of look, I've always really liked really tiny things. So shocking that I went into jewelry making. So I always kind of like, if something seems kind of interesting, then I like zoom right into it and look very closely at it. And sometimes it's just so lovely to be able to go out as part of your job to like go for a walk in the woods and smell all the smells and just like hear the birds. And even sometimes like, because it's not as easy for me to get out into the woods these days without her, which I can, but I always feel guilty. even I'll just go out like on kind of misty, rainy days when there's not a lot of people like out mowing their grass and stuff. So there's no noise. Like, even though I live right in town, I just go kind of like dig through my garden in the damp and and sometimes that's all it is. It's just like right outside the door. So it can be anywhere from like vacations abroad. I have a problem with not trying to sneak things back in my suitcase to cast. But it can also just be right outside my doorstep as well. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, you never know where you're going to find inspiration. I feel like taking those walks and taking that time, it can be so meditative as well.
Yeah. This isn't a lot. The last thing just like, random things you'll find on my bench. I collected that one yesterday. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Before I wrap things up, I'm just going to put a few final notes in the chat, and I'll share my screen as well again. So this has been a celebration of Woodlands Appreciation Week, and hopefully you can all see the slides with How to Love a Forest. It's going to be our final Woodlands Appreciation Walk or webinar that's happening tomorrow. It's with author and forester Ethan Tapper. He is from Vermont and he's releasing a new book, so it's going to be a bit of a book talk as well. It should be quite enjoyable and a great way to spend your lunch. Now, thank you again to all of our speakers for joining us today. It's been lovely having you, Kate, Erin, Kyla, and Josie. We really appreciate your time, and we look forward to hearing and seeing the things that you all do ongoing over time. And
Thanks, Olivia.
Thank you so much.
As I had mentioned, we will include an email to the registrants with your emails, websites, and social media so they can find you. Thanks, everybody, and have a great afternoon.